what you have is a Lars von Trier movie with essentially two people in it, Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg, playing a man and a woman. At the beginning of the film, they are seen in an embrace, in a black and white sequence, and whilst they are in this embrace, their child falls from the window of their house. The film then moves on to a sequence in which they are grieving. He is a therapist. She is a non-specific academic who seems to be doing a thesis in genocide, which is like, misogyny turned into genocide. It was a very sort of 1970s thesis, the kind of thing that people would write about, a long time ago. It's strangely anachronistic. And you know that when Willem Dafoe was here, he said, well, actually, I don't think that's to be taken very seriously. I think that was just a shorthand as a way of saying that she's a progressive feminist. Well, yeah, I think there's more to it than that. You'll also remember that Willem Dafoe said he didn't think, as I did, that it's a film about misogyny. It's clearly a film about misogyny. It doesn't matter what Willem says. It doesn't make any difference. Trust the tale, not the teller. It doesn't matter whether you're in a film, doesn't mean you understand it. I mean, it really doesn't. I do understand the film more than he does, because I've seen it. He was just in it. It's a totally different thing. So it is clearly a film about misogyny. Anyway, he, being a therapist, takes her on as his patient, and he decides that what they need to do is to return to Eden, a wood cabin in this non-specific area, which is obviously called Eden, therefore clearly biblical, where she spent some time with the child before the child died. And during the course of their time in Eden, she comes to believe that everything in the world is evil, including, to some extent, womankind. Here's a clip.
Acorns don't cry. You know that as well as I do. That's what fear is. Your thoughts distort reality. Not the other way around.
Satan's church.
Satan.
Nature is Satan's church.
What?
Why, there you have him. That was his brother.
So here's what you need to know. Firstly, Antichrist contains some of von Trier's best work. There are visual images in it that are very, very striking. It obviously owes an awful lot to generic movies. I mean, it does owe a debt to horror movies, clearly to the tradition of, for example, the cabin in the woods movies like Evil Dead, clearly to some extent to the modern so-called torture porn movement, clearly to some extent to Exorcist, from which it takes some subliminals and also some soundtrack stuff. And that's what it's playing with horror genre conventions. And I have to say, doing it rather well. I mean, there are moments in which essentially what he tries to do is to create an uncanny, eerie atmosphere, and he does it pretty solidly. And I think for an awful lot of credit for that must go to Anthony Dodd Mantle, who's the cinematographer who, of course, shot Slumdog Millionaire, and is frankly a genius, and is really, really great. It's interesting, of course, that von Trier started off by coming up with the dogme principles, that he came up with Thomas Vinterberg, all these things that you couldn't do. You must have handheld cameras, you mustn't have artifice, the director mustn't be credited, you mustn't have special effects, you mustn't have artificial sound effects. And this is his most artifice-laden movie. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing is the performances are great. Willem Dafoe and Charlotte Gainsbourg really go for it. They turn everything up to 11, and you do get a sense in their company of a real sense of conviction and sincerity from the performers. Now, I think it is important to distinguish the sincerity of the performances from the sincerity of the direction and the idea, because no matter how much everyone says Lars meant this film, Lars was depressed when he made this film, I never believe anything that anyone says about Lars von Trier, least of all what Lars von Trier says about himself. Lars can tell you that he's depressed, fine. He says all those. He just says things because he's a prankster. You must never believe anything he says at all. The film he made before this was a film called The Boss of It All, which was a comedy, in inverted commas, that wasn't funny, that began by saying this film doesn't mean anything, it's completely without meaning, it's totally empty, which is kind of a way of saying, actually, there is a meaning here, but it's a double bluff, there isn't a meaning.
The film that you've described so far is sort of unrecognisable the way it's been reported in terms of the
it's not
bad
because,
stuff that
no,
goes
I
on.
think because I say, if you are part of the people of the body of people who are saying it's outrageous, it's shocking, it should be banned, it's disgusting, then you are part of the machine. You are part of the response that the film wants to provoke. Okay, it's simple as that.
Well, hang on. There's a
not
big difference between saying it's shocking, it's outrageous.
Yeah,
the people will think that, but they might not just do the other thing and say it should be banned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that what von Trier wants is people to say it should be banned, and then other people to say no, it's a very, very serious work, and it's neither of those things, because, as I said, with von Trier, you can't trust anything he says. All you can trust is the film itself. So, Funnily enough, tonally, the film that it reminded me of most, and I'm surprised that this hasn't come up elsewhere, is the Andrzej Żuławski film Possession.
I was just going to mention
You
that.
were going to mention that, which starred Isabella Adjani and has a similar sort of shrieking, hysterical, psychosexual tone to it, and for which, coincidentally, Adjani, unless I'm mistaken, won the Best Actress Award at Cannes, which of course Gainsbourg did. And there is a very strange tonal similarity in that both films are demented, and both films achieve a kind of level of hysterical madness and lunacy, which is generated around a female character and relation to her sexuality, in relation to demonic imagery and possession and darkness. And I think they are very, very closely related films, and I'm a big fan of Possession. And incidentally, much as I think there are great things to be said about Antichrist, I don't think it's as good as Possession, but it took most people quite a long time to get their heads around Possession. And remember, Possession was included on the original list of video nasties, the films which were deemed undistributable originally by the Director of Public Prosecutions under the terms of the Obscene Publications Act. So there is a connection there as well. I think the important thing to say is that the elements that are in Antichrist that are shocking are both shocking and at the same time satirical. You shouldn't believe that when things happen in horror movies, they are to be taken literally. They are to be taken metaphorically. And of course, one of the things that von Trier does and has done throughout his career is to take an idea and run with it, no matter how outrageous. Now, the worst of those, I think, is Breaking the Waves, which I think is a genuinely pernicious and misogynist movie, which absolutely deifies the idea of the child woman being abused and therefore receiving her reward in heaven. And it's, I think that's a deeply messed up film. And I do incidentally think that Lars von Trier's relationship to women is at very best suspect. You look at films like Mandalay or Dogville, in which he takes that idea of slaves enslaving themselves. Again, he takes the idea and he takes it to its logical conclusion. The Idiots, I thought, another film in which he took the idea about people pretending to be disabled, and it completely backfired. And he tried to spice it up with some hardcore scenes which were totally gratuitous and didn't need to be there at all. And of course, I shouted at the screen in Cannes. I don't think anybody should have banned the film, which of course they didn't. I just thought it was a load of old nonsense. I didn't think it was obscene. I just thought it was total nonsense. So he's playful, he's a prankster. He said of his last film that it was shot with a thing called automovision. This was for the boss of it all, automovision, which was a computer technique for a principle for shooting film developed with the intention of limiting human influence by inviting chance in from the cold. I read serious reviews of that film that took that. I mean, he's making it up, okay? He doesn't mean it. That doesn't mean that you can't look at the film itself and take the film as seriously as you want to take it. And as a tonal piece, as a piece about grief, as a piece about shrieking sexual hysteria, which is also about misogyny, because it is clear that the narrative line of Antichrist is misogynist, but it's so misogynist that actually it's kind of out the other end and becomes a commentary on misogyny.